service here at Christ United Methodist Church. I'm Barb Knowlton, and I'm one of the certified lay ministers here, and I'm very happy to be able to welcome you today. Let's put our hearts and minds together as we move towards the worship service.
Good morning. I'm so glad you and your family have chosen to be with us this morning. Like you growing up, one of my favorite activities was to play hide and seek. I would play it with my cousins, with my friends in the neighborhood, and we would just run and search for one another, and we would always just have a good time. Playing hide and seek is a fun game. In many ways, when we look at God, we see God playing hide and seek with us, that He is looking for us and He is searching for us and He is wanting to find us because He wants to love us and care for us. Today I want to invite you to allow God to find you, to allow God to love you, and to allow God to care for you. Let us take time and allow God in that love. Amen.
Passage that we're going to be studying. It's Luke 15, verses 8 through 10. Or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost." Just so, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents.
One of my favorite all-time pets was a German Weimaraner dog. This breed of dog is a short, gray-haired dog that has green eyes. They're beautiful animals. Mine was named Gretchen. Gretchen was the type dog that would follow you anywhere in the neighborhood. If you were going to go skateboarding, there she was. If you were going to the river, there she was. She was the type dog that when you pulled into the driveway, she would be there smiling as you would pull in, wagging her tail furiously. However, there were many times that we had to chain Gretchen to a dog run in the backyard. One of the main reasons that we had to do this was she would sometimes get in with a pack of dogs, and the neighbor who had cattle would threaten to shoot that pack of dogs, and even warned us that Gretchen would be a part of that if he caught her running his cattle. Of course, Gretchen desired to be free, and she would strain against that chain and try and get free as many times, and often she did. She would break the chain, or she would manage to break her run, and she would be out in the fields and in the hollers running free. On one particular occasion, she had broken her chain, and we called for her, expecting her to come back, but she didn't. We figured that once evening came and it was time for her to come back home and sleep or eat, she would be back home. But when evening came, she was still not there. We still weren't worried. It was not a cold evening, and we figured that she was okay. And the next morning, we woke up expecting to see her out in her house, laying there asleep. But yet she wasn't there. We hollered once more, but still there was no sign of Gretchen. Throughout the day, I asked neighbors if they had seen Gretchen, but they hadn't either, and I looked around the neighborhood where that she might have been, but still no Gretchen. That evening, I began to get worried, and the next day began to really look for Gretchen. I went up and down the places that I knew that she might have been. I even went back to the river looking for Gretchen. Finally, I decided to look in the hollers that were behind our house. On one side was a very swampy, muddy area, and there was no sign of Gretchen back in there, and I didn't really like kind of having to trudge back through there. The other holler had a road in which I was walking along, and I was hollering for Gretchen. And as I hollered, I heard this little whimper, a dog whimper. And I quieted down and hollered again, and I listened for where she was, and I looked. And down in another swampy area, I could see her and her chain. She had carried that chain with her into the woods and into that swamp, and there that chain had gotten caught on a bush, and she was trapped. She was standing there basically in mud and water, and she was trapped. I climbed down to where she was and managed to get her untangled. I left the chain there because there was no getting it out of the bush that she had gotten it into. And I led her home. There I gave her a bath, cleaned up the mud off of her, and then put her back on the chain. And never once during that time did Gretchen ever resist the bath or the chain. She was glad to be back home, and I was glad to have her back home. Have you ever lost something? Something that was important to you? Maybe it was a set of keys or an earring or a wrench or an important document or your phone, or maybe something that was very valuable to you. When we lose something, especially when it's valuable, we go looking hard for it. We want to find that item. There is a fear that we won't find it, and so often it becomes frantic. But what happens when we lose someone? Women, have you ever lost your man in Lowe's? Husbands, have you ever lost your wife in Hobby Lobby? All joking aside, have you ever lost a child in a store? Suddenly it becomes a frantic search for a child who is lost. Many of us are familiar with that feeling. We're familiar with that feeling that says that this is heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching, that we want to find that which is lost. Imagine then God searching for us, searching for humanity. God looks for the lost. When we look, we see that God desires to find His treasure. says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21, For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. A New Bible translation, the Passion Translation, translates 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9 like this, But you are God's chosen treasure. Humanity, brothers and sisters, is God's treasure. God desires that no person be lost, and yet they are. And so God searches frantically for the lost. Like the woman searching for the lost coin, God goes looking. And He calls us into that search. Will we join Him? Will we join Him in looking for the lost? That call for searching for the lost is all throughout Scripture. In fact, going all the way back into the Old Testament, Isaiah chapter 6, we hear this statement. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And whom will go for us? And I said, Here I am. Send me. We hear that call. But too often what we say is, send the other person. Send him or send her. Because they can get it done. I think in many ways, soul searching and evangelism scares us. What will we say? What if they say no? What if I lose a friend? What if I'm made to look foolish? But often our struggle goes deeper. We fail to really see the other individual. We're blind to their lives. We haven't really made a good relationship with them, so our evangelism is inauthentic. We're afraid to go where the sinners are. We may even build walls around us that keep people out. In many ways, we could ask, do we value the people that God values? It's interesting when we look at this passage this morning, the passage doesn't begin with an appeal to evangelism. It actually begins with the Pharisees fussing at Jesus for eating with sinners, for being where they are. Jesus then launches into two parables, actually three. Three that we understand. The lost sheep, the lost coin, and then the prodigal son. And all of them point to God going and looking for the lost. Going and looking for His treasure. And He invites us into this search. Will we join Him? Think about how far we are willing to really go as Christians. We live in a very rapidly changing society. In fact, some have said that our change is so rapid that it is on another level. It is the level that is like the Renaissance or the Reformation, or when Columbus discovered the New World, or when Constantine converted to Christianity. Some have even said that it's on the level of when writing was invented. Yet so many people live like it's 1950. And the church is so guilty of this. Stop and think, though, about how much change has really entered into our society. When was the last time you shopped at Kmart or Sears or Hills or Montgomery Ward? When was the last time you ate at Western Sizzler or Burger Chef or Chi-Chi's? These are gone. These cause us to really realize how much change has entered into our lives. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 seems so real when we look at our society, in which it says, For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. The reality is the church is slow to change, and sometimes for very good reasons. But in the process, we have failed to realize that there's a huge mission field all around us. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 9, verse 37, He says, The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send laborers out into the harvest. Brothers and sisters, God's treasure, God's harvest is all around us. Have we allowed this ever-changing world, though, to keep us from searching? To go out and look for the lost? There's one word that stands out in this passage that caught my attention almost immediately, and it's the word until. This woman searched until she found her treasure. She didn't look and basically say, well, I can't find it, I'm giving up. She looked until she found it. She lit a lamp, she swept, she searched for her treasure. She didn't let anything deter her. God is the same way. God does not quit looking for His lost ones. God does not stop. Do we? There's a story that is told of a man trying to quit smoking. He's read all of these articles that tell about the dangers of smoking and its linkage to lung cancer. He's talking with one of his friends one day, and he mentions all of this and how worried he is, and he says, well, I've just decided to stop reading. I'm afraid sometimes we are the same way, that basically we have just decided to stop reading. That we're not going to worry about the lost. We're not going to worry about God's treasure. And so we have lost our evangelistic zeal. Our desire to see a changed world, a transformed society. We've looked at our changing society. We've looked at COVID-19 and tossed up our hands and said, what can we do? Even sadder, I think we have looked and we have said, but the cost is so high. A pastor friend of mine recently made an observation I thought was very, very accurate. He said the church has basically been made for about 40% of our society. We need to ask, what about the 60% of our society? What are we willing to do to win them to God? I hate to say standing out the door and hollering like I did to try and get Gretchen back home will not do. Some people are like Gretchen. They are chained and they're caught in the bushes and the swamps of the world, and we have to go to where they are. Galatians chapter 6 verse 9 says, so let us not grow weary then in doing what is right, for we will reap at harvest time if we do not give up. I want you to hear this, because I know that evangelism is scary. We don't evangelize alone. This is God's work. This is not our work. We are simply the conduit for God's love and grace in this world. I'm afraid sometimes we forget who is in the driver's seat. There's a wonderful story that's told of Gertrude and Mildred out driving one day, and two sisters, and they're trading off and talking with one another. And Gertrude gets worried about Mildred as they're driving because she runs through two red lights and she's approaching the third, and it looks like she's going to run through that one as well. And Gertrude hollers out and says, Mildred, the light is red, stop. She slams on the brake and comes to an abrupt stop, and she turns and she looks to her sister and says, I'm sorry, I thought you were driving. How many times are we like that we think that we are in the driver's seat, but we forget that God is always in the driver's seat. And it is His work that causes people to come to know God. It is not us. God is the light that will bring light into people's darkness. 1 John chapter 1 verse 5 says, this is the message we have heard from Him and proclaim to you, that God is light, and in Him there is no darkness at all. God is doing this work. So we cannot rush God. We cannot cause Him to do what He doesn't want to do. It is He who will change sinners' hearts. It is He who will change a community. It is He who will find the lost soul. This is God's work. Our task is just to simply come alongside and labor with God. This is where I think it gets really interesting. Because for most of us, when we hear this type message, this desire to go out and evangelize, we make it churchy and we make it worrisome and we make it into something that is really hard, instead of realizing that this is all about just loving people, caring for people. As a pastor, I represent the church, not just Christ Church, not just the United Methodist Church, but I represent the church. And oftentimes when I have introduced myself to someone as a pastor, and they have been doing something that they think is inappropriate, such as drinking or smoking, suddenly they will change. They will try and hide the beer or try and hide the cigarette as though I did not notice it. It's interesting how many times I will see someone go from sinner to saint quicker than a fat man can get to a Chinese buffet. Sadly, often evangelism fails at this point. because it becomes inauthentic. But when I'm not in that pastoral role, and I don't introduce myself as a pastor, and I can lay that part of my life aside for the time being and just talk with people, just be with them, suddenly authenticity opens up. We connect and we begin to build a relationship, and suddenly one day we're talking and they discover that I'm a pastor and they ask, "Can you tell me something in this area?" Evangelism is about relationships. Relationships where we have the opportunity to reveal God's grace, to move as the Spirit leads, to love people right where they are, to be the healing hands of God, to be right there beside someone and listen and even be heard is a call. But this means that we go into life with people. We go where they are. Evangelism is always incarnational, just as Jesus came into the world with us. I want to invite you to come into evangelism with God, to labor alongside God, and to know that He has given a call upon our life to be evangelistic. Please hear this. COVID has not destroyed the harvest. Our changing world has not destroyed the harvest. If anything, it has made it abundantly clear that the fields are white unto the harvest. We might miss the harvest, though, if we don't go out and work in the fields. This invitation is a little bit different today. I want to invite you to evangelism, of course, because this is what this has been about. But I want you to evangelize as Christ did. I want you to treasure the people that God presents in your life. Love them, care for them. I want you to be relentless as Jesus and God was relentless for us. I want you to be incarnational. Go where people are. Go into their lives. Find God's treasure. Don't give up. And go. Go into the gyms. Go into the trails. Go into the Starbucks, the restaurants, the fishing poles, the stadiums, the sewing clubs. Wherever people are, wherever God is. And love people. And let us help God in finding His treasure. Amen.